Something occurred to me. I fell into a deep, peaceful sleep and haven't thought about you since. You know what occurred to me?
No.
You're just a kid.
Welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. I'm David, and we're continuing our label series today. On the show this time, we got Roger Camero of No Motiv, who of course was signed to Vagrant Records. Roger's played in a ton of bands. Most recently, he's in a band called Peaced Out. He's also in the Warriors. Anyway, we have him on because he was in No Motiv, who was signed, one of the first bands to sign to Vagrant Records back in the day through those prime years. So we talk about his 5 favorite releases that came out on Vagrant Records and, kind of some stories behind those as to why he picked those records and just some, maybe personal connections he's got with them. But we're going to get into that in just a second. I did want to say, make sure you go follow us on our social media at Growing Punk Pod. You'll find Instagram, Twitter, that's where you'll find us, Facebook as well. And you can find us growingpunkpod.com. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get into my interview with Roger Camero of No Motiv, sharing his 5 favorite Vagrant Records releases. So you're able to narrow your list down to 5?
I feel like depending on my mood, I could change the 5. But I don't know. I guess it's just like I feel bad like excluding certain bands or records or something like that.
Well, so when we started this whole idea, I don't know where it came from. I think Aaron had just done 1 or 2 interviews with artists who were on, specific labels. And then he's like, oh, I'm just going to do, an episode or whatever, getting them to share their favorite releases from, such and such a label.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's kind of cool. It'd be cool if we tacked on, did it in 2 episodes so that, per label sort of thing, so that then we can kind of share our lists and then an episode that's an artist list. So that's kind of how it started. It's funny because there are some labels. Vagrant for me is probably going to be the most difficult. I sent you my list and I'm like, when you sent me your list, I was like, oh, it's same sort of thing where I'm like, man, I feel bad not talking about that record. So I think this will work really good because at least between our 2 lists, I feel like, I'll get a chance to kind of talk about, the records I really wanted to talk about, which is, a bit of a bummer on your end because you're like, I want to talk about this one too, but you won't be on that episode.
Oh, no, it's all good.
You just talk about it to tell all your friends, right?
as long as the bands are getting represented between all of us, it makes no difference to me,
Yeah, no, and Vagrant was such a, it was, so for myself, kind of like the first big label I want to say that I got into early on would have been like Tooth and Nail, which we've talked about, like MXPX, Slick Shoes and stuff like that in the past. And then, there were other labels that we're covering as well, Fat, Epitaph, Drive Through, and whatever. But Vagrant was the next real big one for me where, if I saw the Vagrant logo on the back, I was immediately interested, right? So
nice.
Yeah, so it's a pretty crazy label, and I hear things got pretty crazy there at times when they were blowing up. But
I'll do my best to recollect what the mood or the vibe was like around these releases.
Because I know we've talked about this in the past, but I want to say you guys were one of kind of the first bands on Vagrant, right?
Yeah, I think we were maybe technically the 3rd band.
Yeah.
Go to House, Boxer.
Yeah. And then but so all of your records, at least all of your full lengths were on Vagrant. I don't know about the EPs, but
before I was in the band, the first official record No Motiv put out was a local label called Edge Records.
Right.
They put out a record called Cynical with the
But of course lineup. This one here, that was that one was on Vagrant. So which and I think actually you guys were probably the band that really, which is funny to think because by the time, I guess when I got into the band, this was the current record for you guys. So that would have come out. Did it come out before, it came out shortly before Get Up Kids? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, because I feel like that was kind of the first record that like the Get Up Kids was the first one that really kind of
Catapulted.
put them in the stratosphere. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but so I think this was the record, Sadness Prevails, that introduced me to the label. That, or there was it Another Year on the Streets, I think.
The first one was 5 years on the
Yes, okay,
streets.
that was the one. Yeah, 5 years on the streets.
Yeah.
And because that I remember it had Blink
Had
182 was
MXPX.
on there, MXPX was on
Yeah.
there. Yeah, it
Hmm.
was like this weird sort of thing where I was like, and I'm sure that's why I bought it, was because MXPX. I can't remember which song was on there specifically, but um,
I
I
don't
guess I could
know.
look it up.
I don't
I'm
know
curious.
if many of them were like super memorable songs by
Yeah,
those
well,
bands.
like the funny thing is, I know that let's see what was on here, but like Blink 182 was a cover of Dancing with Myself.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. So maybe the like higher level bands,
yeah,
their songs maybe were from the Before You Were Punk
right.
series, perhaps.
Okay, yeah, because it's so MXPX was Blue Moon, which another
Yeah,
cover.
yeah.
You guys had Nostalgia on there. Face to Face, I'm Trying. That was probably another band. Oh, you also had So What on there. Look at that. Two songs. Look at that.
So if you listen to that version of the comp,
Yeah.
that's the original lineup. That's before I was in the band.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
That's not even
Interesting.
like Sadness versions. It's before
Right.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, so that may have been then what kind of got me into the label. It was one of those two. It was either your guys' record, Sadness Prevails, or it was this comp first. But anyways, let's enough about, I guess, the history of how I got into the label. We're here to hear your picks. But I think I know you said it was difficult to narrow it down to five. So why don't, just for the sake of it, why don't you name some of your, I guess, honorable mentions?
Honorable mentions would be the Lemonheads record. It was just like a one-off
Yeah,
that Bill Stevenson produced, and I'm a very huge Bill Stevenson descendant.
sure. Yeah,
Just of like the Bill Stevenson production
yeah.
side of things. Um, what else? As much as I would love to put something to write home about on my top five, it would have to be an honorable mention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe just because it's just such an obvious top three, probably
Right.
for at least 50% of every Vagrant fan
Yeah.
on Earth.
Well, and
So
it's like, I mean, you can put it up there for not even just Vagrant fans, but like anyone who is into, like the whole, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, like emo sort of pop punk sound. Like
yeah,
it's a classic, like, and
it
deservedly
is.
so. And so they actually just yesterday, I think, from when we're recording this, they announced that they're doing by the time this comes out, it may have already happened, but a live stream. They're playing that album cover to cover, which
That's pretty awesome.
they'll get my money.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be very honest, and this is largely due to, at the time, I don't even know if I was 21 yet. Might have
Mhm.
been a late teen when like all of this happened. But maybe there was, I don't want to say rivalry, because there was never any rivalry, but maybe
Right.
there was just like some sort of awkward tension, because we were like the baby band from
Right. Yeah.
Southern California, where the label's from,
Yeah.
and then the Get Up Kids were already well on their way of becoming like an established like emo band.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think us coming from a punk background, we were suddenly lumped in to this emo thing, and
Hmm.
so maybe the whole thing kind of created some sort of little standoffish kind of vibe,
Right.
and it took me a very long time for me to like truly appreciate that record.
Sure. It's interesting because, like, looking at 5 years on the streets, you talk about, because, like, I think when Vagrant hit its peak, it was definitely more known for that emo side of things, right? But like
Yeah.
looking at that compilation, there's definitely a lot less of that on there,
Oh yeah.
of that emo sound, right? Like, and definitely a little more leaning towards like the pop punk, even skate punk sort of stuff, and some ska, obviously, with the hippos and stuff like that on there. But so a bit of a different twist on the label as I guess they grew up, grew up
There
and got
weren't that
sad.
there weren't that many bands on the actual label
Right. Yeah.
at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time. So I guess what other besides those two records, um I want to say Face to Face, How to Ruin Everything
Mm, yeah.
is a really 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 great record. I guess I didn't put them in my top 5 even though they're like an incredibly important band
Yeah.
in my life, and I'm sure yours as well.
Yeah.
Admittedly, my favorite Face to Face records are not the ones on Vagrant,
Fair.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
I still think the ones that they did put out on Vagrant are really awesome. And How to
Yeah.
Ruin Everything is such a great record because uh it's almost like we had first row seats to the journey that band took to
Mm,
get from I mean I had been a fan since they put out Big Choice, and so I saw the evolution
yeah.
where it got to where it brought them to Ignorance is Bliss,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then from Ignorance is Bliss we had front row seats to see how that kind of backfired to
Right.
Reactionary, and then How to Ruin Everything. They at that point became a three piece, and they were such a well-oiled machine. I don't know if you know like the production about the record, but they basically did all the basic tracking live,
Okay.
and they built a stage in the tracking room of the same studio where No Motive recorded their records
Yeah.
in Ojai.
I say I feel like maybe you told, was it this story maybe when you were on the show before, probably.
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah, I'm trying to think which record was it that you guys recorded in that studio?
We recorded all three of
Oh
the
yeah,
band
okay. So
albums.
so I can't pinpoint then which episode it was because we've covered all
Yeah,
three
right.
albums, but yeah, that sounds familiar because I think you maybe then told me something about the drum sound, or so I can't remember, or maybe that
Yeah,
was.
it was just cool because they all played in the same, like literally
Yeah.
played in the same room, and if you listen to the record, it sounds really lively, and it's
Yeah, well,
because they're all in
it's
the same room.
for myself anyways, that record definitely stands out in the face-to-face catalog, and I'm probably in like a similar spot where it's not necessarily my favorite, and maybe my favorite records weren't released in the Vagrant years or whatever, but it
Mhm.
was definitely, like, as far as sound is concerned, like the sonic sort of it definitely stands out, and
Yeah.
it's up there for me because it came out really at a time when I was like well established, I think, with the band, like who they
Mhm.
were and their catalog and whatever. And so it was like the first one, I want to say, maybe that I was around for, that I, like when it came out, I went and bought it versus
Nice.
getting caught up. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but I know you had also mentioned on an early list that you sent me, like the Face to Face live record,
Yeah.
which that was, another one that for me was very, like, we've talked about it on the show before. Aaron and myself, we both just love that record, and but Face to Face is a band that I think we could talk about forever.
Oh yeah, for
Like
sure.
they're still putting out music just as good
Yeah.
now, as
The
they
last
were.
record's great.
Yeah,
What's it called?
Protection.
Protection? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's an awesome record.
and I
And they did
think
that with Bill Stevenson, I think.
I heard rumors that maybe there's another one that they're working on coming up here,
Perhaps.
but I mean, I
Perhaps.
hope so. If Protection was, it's funny because it wasn't until the Live and a Dive album came out,
Hmm.
where they played a lot of songs off of that record, that I really kind of gravitated back towards it and went, oh, this is actually really good.
I did the same
So good.
thing.
Yeah. So good on them.
Did you see them when they were a three piece when they made this How to Ruin Everything?
Yes. I'm gonna say, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was on the tour for that. They played a show in Calgary where they came to town the same day as, like, there was a because they toured with Moneen, I think,
Okay.
on that tour. And so there were two tours that came into Calgary at the same time. So there's the Face to Face show and then a Guttermouth show that
Damn.
came. And so they just ended up, I don't know if the promoters were like, hey, instead of, fighting with each other, let's work together sort of thing. So they made it one big
Smart.
show. Yeah. And it was like 6 bands or whatever.
Very, very
And
smart.
yeah,
Unashamedly smart.
yeah. Face to Face headlined. And it was, oh yeah, it was one of my favorite shows for sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
They were such a machine at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
Like they were just firing on all cylinders for a
Yeah.
band to be able to be once a 4-piece band that we all knew and loved very much, and to be able to strip it down to like the 3 of them, but
Yeah.
still just like have as much power as they were a 4-piece. It was
Yeah. I saw them just a couple of years ago again. They played a smaller venue here than what obviously I'd seen them in the past. And it was actually a bit of a bummer because there were not a lot of people there. And it was like standing on the floor, like where the pit typically would be. It was almost as if social distancing was already a thing. Like you could almost like spin around and not touch anyone.
the awkwardness.
Yeah. But it was such a great show.
Yeah.
And then speaking of social distancing, they were supposed to, obviously they had their big choice tour that they were going to do. And I had tickets to that, but that was one of the shows that got canceled. So,
Well, at some point.
yeah, I'd love to see him again. And, in a more full room. I don't know what the deal was that night, but because they were lights out. So, but
it's a hard time for the, I guess for lack of a better term, legacy punk bands.
right. Yeah.
It's just I've seen a handful of like this era, like the Face to Face, Lagwagon,
Yeah.
Good Riddance.
Yeah.
It's just
I think when
hard.
Lagwagon played here, I didn't go to that show, but I think it was well attended. I did go see Millencolin right around that same time, and it was packed. And so it was. I just feel like it was just like an off thing. Like I think the Big Choice tour, like the show here, sold out or was close to selling out anyway. So I think it was just like for whatever reason, maybe it wasn't well promoted. I don't know.
Yeah,
Something
perhaps.
misfired, but whatever. I'll hopefully get to see him again sometime. But I did want to mention because you brought up the Lemonheads record.
Yes.
And I hadn't listened to it. In fact, it was funny because when you mentioned it, I was like, the Lemonheads, like, wasn't that a band like in the 90s
Yeah.
that, and I didn't go back to see like what I would have known them from other than maybe just knowing the name, but I did listen to their self-titled record that was on Vagrant. And it's an interesting, I was trying to think like, how do I describe what I'm hearing? Because there's definitely, like, especially that first song, it's definitely more like that might be the most punk song on the record, but it reminded me a little bit of like Elliott Smith meets like Energy.
Yeah.
Because there were just some melodies like that kind of were woven through that I'm like, man, that reminds me of Elliott Smith, but without just being him, and his acoustic guitar or whatever and singing as delicately as he can, right? But it was an interesting listen, and it was kind of one of those surprises where I was like, they were on Vagrant, like
just one record.
yeah.
Rich did a great job of getting some of the like, I don't know, icons, I guess we'll call them, of like the old school punk era. I mean, like I grew up listening to the Lemonheads and knowing them as like an alternative rock band.
Yeah.
That did like the Mrs. Robinson cover.
I was like, I know them somewhere. Okay, so that would be the song then. I was like, I should look on my Apple Music and see what their number one song is, because I'm sure that'll be it. But great cover.
if you listen to their earlier stuff on Tang, they were like a raunchy punk band.
Yeah.
Like a super noisy, like legit punk band. Yeah. So for Rich to sign like Evan Dando basically to a record, and then somebody like Paul Westerberg, it was just kind of like along the same veins, like
right.
Dude from the Replacements, dude from the Lemonheads. He did a good job of grabbing a couple of those icons and like having them be part of the label and stuff. So
yeah. Have you ever? This is kind of not related, but have you ever read the book "Our Band Could Be Your Life"?
I didn't.
you should. I don't know how much reading you do, but like if you're a reader or not, but it's just I was just like sitting here thinking, going like, it's crazy how many of those like 90s alternative bands came from, you know, like the punk scene, the hardcore scene sort of thing, right?
Yeah,
Like, and what
man.
came, and so like that's what that book's about, is like the kind of the
Oh, sweet.
groundwork laid before them. But
Got it.
yeah, that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. So did you have any other honorable
Um,
mentions you wanted to throw out there real quick before we get into your top five?
um, I mean, this is a much. I mean, it's not that much later, but it's. I guess it's not back then, and it's not necessarily totally current. But the City and Color, "Bring Me
Uh,
Your Love"
yeah.
album.
Oh, that's. I've got that on vinyl too, because I brought your guys' down, and then Dashboard and some Monine.
Nice.
Although I think the Monine record I brought down, I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't know if it's on, if it was on Vagrant, or if they
Yeah,
just did they do,
that
or
that
I think,
record right there is on
yeah,
Vagrant.
I think they re-released it. Maybe I don't think it was an original Vagrant release. I think the like the Red Tree, yeah, was
Yeah,
like
that's from
the,
Vagrant.
yeah, that was
I'm
on Vagrant. But I think, are we really happy with who we are right now? I think was originally released up here, and then when they signed
oh,
to
okay.
Vagrant, Vagrant re-released it. But yeah, the City and Color I thought about bringing down too, but I wasn't sure if you'd bring it up, so I didn't bring it down.
Hey, man.
But got to get some
Just
Canadian love in there.
exactly. I was gonna say
Yeah,
I just wanted to show some Canadian love throughout City and Color,
yeah,
and you got
yeah,
Monine. You already said
yeah.
Monine, so
We're
we got it.
covered. So let's get in. Let's get into your top five then. What now? Are these, when you sent me the list? Are these in order? Like, are you like, this is my top five, or is it just kind of like you're like, these are five albums that I love?
Um, it's funny because I was talking about this with Matt Embry and Steve Choi while we were hiking. I was telling them how later on in the evening I'd be doing this
Yeah,
podcast with you, and we were I was trying to like bust out the order of like what is the goat
yeah.
of Vagrant Records. And so um all three of us pretty much said "Stay What You Are" is the best
Well,
record to ever come out on Vagrant.
spoilers, man. You're supposed to give that in like
No,
reverse order,
no,
but okay.
yeah,
So we're doing this different. Your number one is "Saves the Day." Stay What You Are.
yeah,
Everyone
yeah.
can just turn the podcast off now. Done and done. So what was it about that record? I mean, I love that record as well. Saves the Day is an interesting band for me, so we could talk about them for a little bit. But what was it specifically about that record that puts them at the right at the top for you?
It's a perfect record.
All right, fair enough. Moving on.
It it's for that band, and the records that they did before this
Mhm.
record. They obviously grew into their sound. They've started off as like a very inspired by Lifetime
Right. Yeah.
sounding band,
Yeah.
and then kind of separated themselves a little bit on Through Being Cool, which I
Mhm.
think is an absolutely stellar record
Yeah.
as well, but obviously not in Vagrant.
Right.
But they just really came into their own vibe
Yeah.
on Stay What You Are, and I just think the songwriting is just a whole other realm from where they were. Um, every piece of the puzzle is very special. It's like a complete picture,
Yeah.
It and it's not like super overproduced or anything like that. It sounds raw in a warm and welcoming way. It's slick enough. Um, yeah, and of course, when that record came out, that was when we did the Vagrant America tour
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
them, and so most of my choices kind of revolve around the golden era and
Yeah.
like the records that came out around the time where when Motiv was touring
Yeah.
and like involved. So
I
it's
mean,
fully
yeah.
nostalgic.
This record, um, it's funny because when you're kind of talking about it there, like sort of the progression of the band, with what was the name of, I have that first record. I found it at a thrift shop recently, but I can't remember the name of it. But anyways, and then
The first Saves the Day record,
yeah,
Can't Slow Down.
yeah, okay. And then Through Being Cool, and then into Stay What You Are, like I felt like they learned, I believe you referred to them as ugly chords back when we first talked about
Yeah.
Sadness, right? Because there's definitely a shift in like, well, everything really about what they were as a band, I feel, but it wasn't like this dramatic, like this isn't the same band sort of thing. Like
Yeah.
there was a progression here, but for myself, like it was the first Saves the Day record that I actually really got into. And then I remember people telling me, oh, you have to listen to Through Being Cool. And I mean, it's Through Being Cool. I think both Through Being Cool and Stay What You Are both are kind of go down as like pinnacle records in the scene,
Hmm.
but almost in different, very different ways.
They
You
are.
know? Yeah.
I mean,
And
it's like they're like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
yeah. But they
Uh,
complement, yeah, but they complement each other really well. Like I think, I don't know, but when I said Saves the Day is an interesting band to talk about, because for me, after this record, I don't really know what went on so much. Like I like In Reverie,
yeah.
um, and it grew on me, but it was like clearly like this point where I was like, okay, I'm not following necessarily where you're going now. Like something changed that I just didn't.
Something definitely changed. And
Yeah,
I don't want to allude to I don't want to spread gossip, but I think they I don't know. I think their minds went into different places
right,
once from In Reverie on. And then
yeah,
obviously like member changes after.
right, yeah, yeah. But I don't know. Though that record, "Stay What You Are," will for sure go down as it was one that I contemplated heavily putting on my list too, because like this is the thing about Vagrant is just as you go through it, you kind of sit back and think, and you go, there were a lot of good records that
Yeah,
came out
man.
like in just like a short amount of time, even just a couple of years, right? Like, I mean, it's incredible. So, I guess we'll just get into that was your number one. So we'll just go with whatever order you want. What record do you want to talk about next?
The next one I would say would be From Here to Infirmary,
Yeah.
Alkaline Trio. I mean, it's honestly to do a top five for it to be like the number one, the number
Mhm.
two. As soon as I say "Stay What You Are" is the best album to ever come out on Vagrant, as soon as I say "From Here to Infirmary" or any of the ones that follow,
Yeah.
they're all so extremely important to me, and like
Yeah.
they all share something special. So
Yeah.
for there to be a goat, sure, we'll just give it to Saves the Day, whatever, fuck
Sure.
it. But Alkaline Trio, From Here to Infirmary is that's a wonderful record, man.
It
I mean,
is.
it's before they kind of moved into their I, I don't know how many eras you want to say Alkaline Trio's gone through,
Yeah.
but I feel like um From Here to Infirmary is like the last record before they kind of went to the more modern,
Right.
slick, kind of, I don't know, like
Yeah.
radio friendly production.
Right. Fair. We did a series of episodes on Alkaline Trio. I want to say it was last summer,
Hmm.
like this past summer. Um, and they're a band. It was interesting to me because it started. We were just going to do an episode on this record, From Here to Infirmary and Good Morning, because those are my two favorite for myself Alkaline Trio records.
Hmm.
And then they're just a band that literally once you go in and you start looking at it, you just got to keep going on. Like they're an interesting band to me that I feel like, sure, there might be some slight changes, like you mentioned, going a little more radio friendly in their sound versus kind of the earlier stuff. But at the same point, they're very much a band that it's like you can hear Alkaline Trio from that first record, and you can hear Alkaline Trio on whether it's Is This Thing Cursed or like the three
Hmm.
songs EP thing they released, I think last year or whatever. And it's still like, to me, it's still the same band. Like they're still putting out songs that are,
Yeah.
just as good. I may not connect with them in the same way that I did, at this point in time, like with Infirmary.
Yeah.
Um, but they're still much like Face to Face we were talking about. Like they put out a record and you go, yeah, it's a good Alkaline Trio record,
Mhm.
like
Yeah, 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 for
they they
sure.
they keep it up. So but this record for me, I think too is um again, I said this kind of when we were texting earlier. It's like I kind of built my list based a little bit around yours because it was a loophole for me to still be able to talk about a bunch of records that I
For sure,
really
man.
love.
Yeah, man.
So, yeah, no, this is so good. So now you like, were you into Alkaline Trio
Beforehand.
before this record? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. So, I became a fan when they put out Maybe I'll Catch Fire.
mm,
I for whatever reason, maybe because it's just so raw dog.
yeah,
Um, and like I've always been drawn to the more, I guess, slick-ish production. That for bands records, like if we're take Jawbreakers for instance,
yeah,
like I love Dear You more
yeah.
than the other records,
Me
and
too.
probably because the production has a lot to do with it.
Right.
But for not that God damn it and Maybe I'll Catch Fire sound like that much different from each
Yeah,
other, but I think like just like the songwriting for Saves the Day, the songwriting for Alkaline Trio, it just kind of kept moving in a direction that I
yeah,
really liked. And Maybe I'll Catch Fire just kind of had that vibe that was really like dialed in to my taste, I guess.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, goddamn, it has some really great songs. Um, so yeah, when we found out that Vagrant was signing the trio, we were like, wow, that's really fucking cool.
So
And
were you guys informed of those things before they happened?
pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
they would like they just give you a call or whatever and be like, "Hey, by the way, we're signing these guys now." Or was it more like, I guess, because like, did you guys ever tour with Alkaline Trio?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We so just I mean like literally all like the three bands that we've the three main bands we've discussed thus
Yeah.
far,
Yeah.
Go Kids, Saves the Day, and
Yeah.
Alkaline Trio. We knew they were going to be on the label before they were on the label,
Yeah.
with like some sort of opportunity to even play a show or
Mm.
like meet them perhaps. Like I remember we were on a solo tour in Florida, and at the time, Skiba was in Gainesville for some reason, so he came
Okay.
out to the show, and it was before they were like on the label,
Yeah.
and he just like broke down for a night, and we were like, we're gonna be on the same label, sick, And then I think we did a H2O Saves the Day tour. And I'm not quite sure if Saves the Day was officially on Vagrant yet because they were
Right.
touring for Through Being Cool at the
Okay.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was like another like kind of thing.
Man, that would have been a sweet show.
The H2O
Yeah. Yeah.
that was a wild tour, man.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was it was it literally might have been the first tour they did after they got into their crazy accident,
Okay.
because at the time like the dudes were still pretty banged up.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but yeah, uh, thankfully, luckily, whatever, we had multiple opportunities to tour with both of those bands. Ironically, we never did an actual tour with the Ghetto Kids.
Oh, funny.
We've only done a couple one-offs together, but we never did extensive touring. But we toured with Alkaline Trio on this record, which is probably another large reason why I picked it,
Right.
just because that sort of connection. Um, and if I had to pick my favorite Alkaline Trio song, it'd probably be Crawl.
Okay.
So it's on that record.
Yeah, that's fair. That record, when we went through it, I had such a tough time. Like with with an album like Good Morning, I had my specific songs off the top. I was like, oh, I know these are the ones I love.
Yeah.
Um, but with Infirmary, it's definitely interesting because as I'd listen through it, I'd be like, oh, this is that part of that song that I really love, and this is that part. There's just so
Yeah.
many memories or moments, I guess, on that record that kind of really jump out. But yeah, it's a good record. So
Yeah, man. I remember when they would play Armageddon
yeah,
live, and it
yeah,
was just like, oh man, just the whole the energy in the room when they would play that song, because it was a
yeah,
new song at the time, and
yeah.
everything just felt really good
Yeah.
at that time. And that tour was it might as well have been I don't know. I have the tour poster upstairs,
Right.
but I don't think it had the Vagrant America theme, but it
Yeah.
was Vagrant Records presents.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it was Trio, Hot Rod, us, and maybe Dashboard was on that.
Okay.
And Dashboard was like the opener, like on the poster,
Yeah.
but that poster was definitely made before the tour happened because he was definitely the main support act.
Yeah. Yeah.
by
That's
the
funny.
time that happened.
I mean, that's a story. Just about like talk about a guy just blowing up. Like,
Yeah,
and like, yeah, seemingly real quick. Um,
yeah,
well, do you want to
yeah,
talk about, so did you just, did you say Hot Rod was on that tour?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. So
We
why
could go
not,
right into that.
yeah, why not we
We could jump
transition with that?
into
Because
Sorry About Tomorrow is another record that I would have to have on my top five.
yeah,
For similar, I mean, it's basic with the exception of one record. These records, with the exception of two records,
mhm,
these three records very much are in my heart because of being able to see these bands play these songs
right,
live so many times, and just like these other bands, we our band um we were fans of Hot Rod Circuit before they were
yeah.
ever on Vagrant.
Yeah, and it's funny because Vagrant is responsible for introducing me to a bunch of bands because Hot Rod Circuit were another band where I really got into that record. I think I bought it two reasons, and I think we talked about this maybe a little bit when we discussed Diagram for Healing, because I feel like while they're different, the artwork has a similar kind of feel for me
Mm,
between Diagram and this Hot Rod record.
yeah.
But then again, people being like, "Oh, well, they've been around for a little bit. You should check this out or whatever," right? Like,
Yeah.
and just being a band that's and here's the crazy thing, you know, loving bands from a certain era and a certain time, I'm still discovering things about these bands and these members. Like I didn't realize until just the other day, I never listened to the band Terrible Things,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is, yeah, like Fred from Taking Back Sunday, and I can't remember his name now from Hot Rod Circuit, but like
Is
singing
it
on it.
Andy?
Is that the lead singer?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's, and if you haven't heard it, it's like it's
I haven't.
really quite good. Like it came out, I want to say it was like 2010.
Okay.
I'm trying to look it up right now, but you search Terrible Things and other thing like other releases from other artists come up first. So yeah. Oh no, is it Aaron? Steven. Aaron? Basically, oh, maybe some
It's one of
Anthony.
the guys from Taking Back Sunday.
Well, so Taking Back Sunday, it's Fred Mascherino. Oh, and Andy. So yeah, and Andy Jackson. There he is. I was like looking for. So Andy was in the band at the beginning of it for the first
Oh,
couple of
okay.
years. I don't know if it's still. It still says, it says they're still active. I don't know if that's true or not,
Oh, okay.
um, but yeah,
This
they
is
released. Go ahead.
this is separate of like the Color Fred or whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
so that's what confused me because the Color Fred was kind of what he did first,
yeah.
out like after Taking Back Sunday, and then I was watching a like a vlog or something that he was doing, and he brings up this band Terrible Things, and I'm like, what is this? And so I
Huh.
looked it up, and I'm like, wait a minute. Like I was watching a music video, and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool because it has, I mean, much like the Color Fred had definitely some Taking Back Sunday vibes. I think it's like he played a big part in writing when he was with
Hmm.
the band. So the Color Fred naturally did. This did too. And then yeah, when all of a sudden Andy's singing, and I'm like, dang, like these two voices together is really nice. Like they're not doing it to the same way, you know, like that Taking Back Sunday would,
Hmm.
like with kind of the back and forth or whatever. But Andy definitely, like there's, I think they only had one record. There is a couple songs anyways where he sings lead on it, and
Sweet.
it's, yeah, it's real good. It's, if you
Is
haven't
it
heard it,
is it on Vagrant?
no, I think it was Equal Vision
Oh, okay, okay.
is what it was released on. I'm just going to double check here because I do have it open. Labels. Well, that says Universal. I felt like it was on Equal Vision though, but
Hmm.
maybe not. The album was released on Universal. All right, cool.
Right on.
Just jumped right into the majors off that one, I guess. But
I mean, that was a weird. That was, that's a
yeah,
music went a really weird direction in the 2000s.
right.
Yeah,
All my
with
favorite
record labels
bands.
and all that stuff. But
Yeah, yeah,
um, yeah, with Hot Rod Circuit, man, the first two records that they put out were already like super awesome.
yeah,
And it's not like their style changed incredibly. It's more like their first two records sounded very, very indie
yeah,
and of the time, and then they went to McTurnan to make Sorry About Tomorrow, and it was just like, oh yeah, now you're like fully dialed in.
yeah.
You have like the dude that makes records sound
And
really large.
it's yeah, and it's a bummer to me that I didn't talk when I interviewed Brian. I didn't talk with him about that record because it's
Yeah.
definitely one up. But I was like, there's so many on here,
Oh, dude.
like I was like, I can't like just. I'm
You
not
could
gonna
do
take.
a week of
I
podcasts.
was gonna say I'm not gonna take your whole day with me just like fanboying over some of these records from my my teenage years or whatever,
Dude,
right? So
he's made so many records that I love.
and
It's ridiculous.
yeah, and just the nicest dude too. Like it was
It's
great.
awesome.
But yeah, no, Hot Rod Circuit. It's one of those ones I've talked about this on a recent episode we did where like some of these going back and looking at these labels and some of the releases that make my top fives or whatever, they're not necessarily records that I come back to on my own, if that
Mm.
makes sense. Like
Mhm.
revisiting them because like, oh, doing an episode on like recently we did Victory Records, right? And so there was like the Stray Light run, for instance, or Refused,
Mhm.
or a couple records that I don't come back to regularly, but when I'm looking at like the records that I really got into from those labels, it's like,
You want to
oh yeah,
pull them out.
they're on there.
Yeah.
Whereas like Hot Rod Circuit, really so far the three records we've mentioned, more so Hot Rod Circuit and Alkaline Trio are like ones that I come back to. I'll just be like, this is what I want to listen to, and so
Yeah.
it gets put on. So um,
It's on the rotation. So,
yeah, and
yeah.
so this record was always interesting to me though because like I have a hard time pinpointing what it is I love about it, if that makes sense. Like,
Songwriting, man, it's just
well,
so
and I guess that's
good.
probably what it boils down to is it's just they write good songs, whereas like with just thinking of like other Vagrant bands, like it took me forever to realize what it was that I loved about Hey Mercedes, and then I realized like, oh, it's again songwriting, but specifically Bob Nana's lyrics and how he like
Mm.
puts things together, right? That
Mhm.
really like kind of make it click. And Saves the Day, Stay What You Are is more just like, well, it's just something different and they did it so well, and for the time it really stood out. Like there are things, but like this one I've always been like, it's pretty straightforward as far as the record's concerned. But I guess yeah, the songs are just they're just good songs. Like they
You,
they
you,
stand on their own.
the thing I love about that band and that record in particular is they do the dynamics
Hmm.
extremely well.
Yeah,
The I don't want to say that the verses are necessarily quiet,
right,
but when it comes to the choruses, they really like,
right,
the dynamic really comes
yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah.
I think they did an excellent job of establishing that on that record. If
And
if there was a thing about Sorry About Tomorrow,
hmm
aside from the basic songwriting and the vibe, it was their ability to like kind of create some sort of roller coaster that the listener goes
right, and
on.
that's fair, and I think it's a record too that's it's like over before you know it,
Yeah.
and you're just like, okay, that was good, like because there's no skippable songs on it for me. And there are records where I can still love them, but there's the odd song where I'm like, okay, I could do without this one, but like this one I think, yeah, just you put it on and next thing you know you're done and you're like,
Yeah.
I could do that again. I don't know what the runtime is on it. I feel like it's not very long, but I
No.
mean that's pretty par for the course for a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
releases at that time. But yeah, why don't we move on to the next one then that you want to talk about?
So that's three, right?
Yeah, we've done three.
That's three. Okay.
Yeah.
And before we move on to the fourth one, it should be stated that Chris Connolly's lyric writing is probably alone one of the reasons why that record could be in fact the best record.
Right. He like especially on that record, so dark.
Yeah.
But like that's also one of the like I mean, Alkaline Trio, that was one of the things that was kind of like endearing for me as well, was like there weren't a lot of bands that were doing that lyrically, right? That were
Hmm.
getting that in the scene anyways, that were getting dark like that. But yeah, no, yeah, I can agree with that on both on for both of those bands.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
But yeah, what's
Um,
next?
what's next is Rocket from the Crypt live from Camp X-Ray.
All
Uh,
right.
are you a Rocket from the Crypt fan?
Um, I can officially say I don't want to say no because that sounds like I didn't like it, but I think when I put it on, because I'd never listened to the album before, but
Okay,
I want to say I'm Not Invisible. Was that in a Tony Hawk game?
you could have been. I don't
I
know.
think it was, because I was like, oh, I know this song. It's the opening track on the album.
Then it might be.
Yeah, and immediately I'm like, I feel like I'm playing like a skateboard video game. I'm
Hmm.
gonna look it up here in a second, but
There's a chance because Vagrant and Tony Hawk they had a relationship. I
did
think
they?
I believe so.
Fill me in on this, because I was unaware of that. Unless it's all
Um,
you're just making it up.
no, I only know this because I don't know if you heard that Washed Up Emo uh radio show that Rich Egan did
Yeah.
with Tom, but Rich basically did his like Vagrant playlist, and
Oh, sweet. Yeah,
and one of the songs on it was a My Chem cover of a Misfits song, and it came from a Tony Hawk soundtrack, and
yeah.
it's
Okay.
because they tabbed Vagrant to do the soundtrack
Oh,
for the
that's
video game, and they
that's
had to
cool.
do it in a matter of like 2 weeks or something like that.
Right. Hmm.
So yeah, but yeah, back to Rocket from the Crypt. If you did not, if you have not heard any releases other than this one,
Hmm.
I strongly urge you to listen to the album Scream Dracula Scream.
Okay.
It's my favorite. It's probably, for at least I would say half of Rocket from the Crypt's fans, they'd probably put that as their favorite record. Maybe.
Okay.
I mean, they put out a lot of records at this point now, but um, I mean, before they were on Vagrant, they already had a long-standing career
Yeah.
on like independent labels, major labels, and so I think when they went to Vagrant, uh, that also opened up the floodgates for John Reese, the singer of Rocket, to kind of like, I don't know if he like had his own like sub, if he was part of Swami, which
Right.
is John Cohen, the one of the co-founders of Vagrant,
Okay.
his like side label, I guess if you want to call that.
Okay.
Swami put out Hot Snakes, which is another John Reese band. John Reese being the singer of Rocket from the Crypt. But like that whole San Diego punk scene, they're kind of like they're like the boss. They're the bosses of that. I mean, it's just their history goes back so far. But as far as Rocket from the Crypt's concerned, they've had, I don't know, they have a very wide ranging style.
Yeah, I didn't really know how to classify them and listening to them. By the way, that song "I'm Not Invisible" was on Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4, which is interesting to me because I don't remember playing that specific game, but that's what it comes back as. So like, I must have at some point.
Probably.
But yeah, like because like I mean, for me, like the easy or almost like irresponsible way would just be like to describe them as a ska band, but that's not even close, right? Like, because I'm just like, they've got the punk
Just
element
because they have the horn.
and they have the horns, right? So it's like that's where my brain first goes, and then when I'm listening to it, I'm like, but no, that's not
There's nothing
what's
ska
happening
about
here
them.
at all. Like, I don't know how to describe what they're
They're
doing.
it's like rock and roll. Like
Yeah,
from the big band era, you know, like
It's
from back in
pretty
the
cool.
day.
I'd have to like go back and because I went through the album. I think I just went through it the once. Like when you'd sent me your list, I was like, oh, I should probably familiarize myself with that a little bit. But it was for sure a listen where I was like, you know what? Like I'm digging it. I was never, like I said, into the band outside of knowing the one song from a video game
Hmm.
and not even realizing, I think, like who it was, type thing. That maybe it was in another video game too, and that's where I knew it. But
I mean, in my opinion, there's no band like Rocket from the
yeah,
Crypt.
100%.
I mean, you can't even describe what genre they are.
Yeah.
They're kind of like their own thing.
Yeah.
Um, but John Reese is kind of, he's not kind of, he is a legend. I don't know his entire timeline as a musician, but like some of his notable bands or more notable bands would be like Pitchfork, Drive Like Jehu,
Okay.
Hot
Yeah.
Snakes,
Yeah.
Rocket from the Crypt.
Yeah.
So the dude's has an extensive catalog. He's like a songwriting genius.
Mm,
I mean, that's such a unique style.
yeah.
Like it's indescribable. Some kind of and I don't know if you like follow specific musicians, but their I believe their original drummer was Adam Willard. I don't know
Okay.
if
Yeah.
he's their original, but he was a
He
long
was,
time
oh,
ago.
okay. And that's probably where more frequently maybe I would see Rocket from the Crypt being brought up because of obviously like Adam's involvement with Angels and Airwaves to Against Me to
Yeah,
every band under the sun.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like that's just a little history to know like where
Yeah.
the you know.
Is he
But
in the
that
Offspring
record,
too? I feel like
he was in Offspring for a
yeah,
while.
yeah,
Yeah,
man,
yeah,
that
yeah,
guy.
yeah.
Yeah,
That dude's an incredible drummer.
for sure.
So fun to watch. I love that record because it's super raw.
Mhm.
It's called Live from Camp X-Ray.
Yeah,
So I want to say, and I don't know this, I never
yeah.
knew this, if they actually performed it live, but it
Like
sounds
what?
like they did. Like at least the music.
Yeah, like um, because that was one thing that threw me off about the name of the record. I was like, oh, because you had it on your first list
Hmm.
alongside Face to Face Live, and I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
oh, interesting. He's got two, but yeah, it's. I'm just trying to see if I can find anything about it.
It's definitely a studio album, but they just
Yeah,
I would like to think that they just performed the music live and maybe overdubbed vocals and stuff.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to see. Like on Wikipedia, it just says it is not a live album, but rather a studio recording. But that's what I'm wondering too, if it was like one of those things
Fully
where it was,
performed live.
yeah,
Sounds like it. I mean, if you listen to the record, it's not like perfect.
right, for sure, and yeah, but
And
hey,
that's I mean that's a large part of why I love it.
totally,
It's just you'd have to see them also.
yeah,
If you were to get the chance to see them and see what they're all about, you'd be like, "Okay, these dudes know how to party."
like maybe I'm wrong in this, but for some reason, when I think of the band Rocket from the Crypt, I assume that their bass player plays a stand-up bass.
I mean, you're not like totally off to think that they put out I don't know if it's called a self-titled record because it's called RFTC, I
Right.
guess.
Yeah.
It was their last major label record and it has that kind of I don't want to say rockabilly
Yeah.
because it's not,
But you
but
can
like
hear like even on Live from Camp X-Ray, I think you can like because that is
there's
another
elements.
yeah, like that's when I was like talking about like trying to label it under a
Yeah.
genre. I was like rockabilly's not a label that I'm going to put on, but you can hear like there's something going on there. And it
Hmm.
is so all over, but it's all over the place, but not like all over the place. And it doesn't feel like a cohesive album or sound, right? Like it just sounds like this is the
It
band,
sounds like them.
and yeah, and they just know how to pull influences to make one sound, right? Like
Yeah.
it's pretty great.
But yeah, that self-titled record, if you listen to that one, that is probably like the to me the weird album.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
like and to think of the time that it came out, and like how rockabilly or whatever, like the music climate at the time
Hmm.
had a lot of that kind of vibe,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's almost like they had to play into that kind of era of
Right.
music.
Yeah.
But then after that, they signed to Vagrant, put out Group Sounds, and just like went full like them,
They just
full.
went full Rocket from the Crypt.
They just went full San Diego, and
Yeah.
it's awesome. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
Rocket
Yeah.
from the Crypt, man.
Right
Fucking
on. So let's get into this is, I guess, technically, I don't know what your fifth album is because you kind of teased a couple different things. So what is
uh
your fifth album? I think I have a pretty good idea, but
uh I mean, full disclosure, I would have picked Daylight Breaking, but we've like we've texted and
yeah.
said many times, we've done multiple podcasts about my band, so we
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
need to talk about any of that shit anymore.
Like we deep dove that record.
Yeah.
You
I
gave
guess
us
if we want to like say technically, I would like to put one of my own bands on that list,
yeah, that's
but I
fair.
feel like it's not appropriate for this. So I will not. And so I will go, since I've pretty much, I mean, I don't know anybody in Rocket from the Crypt, but they just deserve that much respect. But
Oh,
with all the other bands, they're like bro bands.
yeah.
So got to keep the bro band tradition alive. And we'll pick one album from the post, like, I don't want to say it's post the golden era, but
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
it's kind of post the golden
Yeah.
era.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Thrice Beggars.
Yes. This record, it's funny because I just want to look here to make sure I've got this correct. Yeah, okay. So this was but basically what followed the Alchemy Index stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when did those come out? 2000. Okay, so not that far before, but Beggars was the first album for Thrice that I was like, I'm good.
Yeah, yeah.
but but here's the funny thing. So I just wanted to share this real quick, and then I want to hear what you love about the record,
Mm-hmm.
because Thrice was a band that starting with the Alchemy Index, I was sort of like checking out a little bit, even though the idea of like the 4 EPs was really cool and kind of ambitious and what have you, but I was sort of like checking out, like I said. And then so when Beggars came out, I was like, okay. And then I don't know if I listened to Major Minor. I probably did, but I didn't like listen to anything forever. And then I
Mm-hmm.
had a friend tell me that I needed to listen to Be Everywhere is to Be Nowhere. And
Mm-hmm.
holy crap, like that record
Just
immediately,
pummeled you.
oh, it is so good. And like looking at it right now, I'm like, oh, I got to go back and listen. Like I'm like, I want to like cue it up so it's like the next thing I listen to.
Nice.
But it I don't know what it is about that record, but yeah, like I had a buddy tell me, he's like, nope, you gotta do it. Like, don't write them off. And so because of that, I was very, very keen to listen to this record, Beggars, because like I said, I just kind of written it off early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they're a band that definitely made changes to their sound over the course of their life. I mean, they're still going, but
Yeah,
so what is it about Beggars that that made the list for you?
yeah. Well, I guess before I can even talk about the record, I have to say that I've been a Thrice fan since Identity Crisis.
Yeah.
So I have followed them on the journey. And obviously, with that being said, I'm well aware of the progression.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being partially a fan of music and a musician, I understand the what bands want to do, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah.
Um, Not every band can get away with like being Pennywise.
Shout out to Pennywise.
Like Pennywise is sick,
Yeah, yeah.
but they're like always been Pennywise.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, there's something to say. I feel like that's come up a little bit with a few other bands where, you know, obviously like Face to Face tried something a little different at one point, but for
Mhm.
the most part, Face to Face has always been Face to Face. Just they've they've polished it. Same with Alkaline Trio. Like there's slight variations, but Thrice is a band I think that when you talk about progressing,
They
similar
go
maybe in a
places.
way to like Saves the Day, not where say like Saves the Day, like we were talking about, like I don't know what happened after In Reverie. Like there is something. Whereas like Thrice, it's kind of like, yeah, I could still hear with Beggars, and I'm like, oh, like these guys are still legit doing what they do. But it was a
So
sound that
different.
lost me at that time. Whereas now though, I could go back to it, I think, and be like, oh, you sort of start seeing, I guess, with time, just like what's happening with that band. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely, I was listening to it this evening just after supper. I was like, oh man, like this record is definitely better than the credit I gave it, or refused to give it, I suppose, when it first came out.
It takes, I'll be honest, it takes a while to digest it. And
Yeah.
being a fan of the band, and like like I love the progression that they've gone
Hmm.
on from all the way from the beginning to Palms. I think it's all great.
Yeah.
Um I will say that Artist in the Ambulance is my favorite record.
Yeah.
It's a masterpiece of its time and
Hmm.
its genre that it fits in. But this band to me fits in multiple genres at this
For
point
sure.
now.
And I think that's like what was, I'll admit it, like difficult for me to grasp sort of at that time. Um, Not that like, because when Beggars came out, that was what, was it 2009 or no? Yeah, 2009. So like it was, I wouldn't say that I was still, because I wasn't in high school anymore. I wasn't really stuck in that high school world, but
Mhm.
definitely like kind of in a place where music had to be one thing or another, kind of, if that like makes sense. Like
Yeah.
I was still, I want to say, in a phase where like, oh, I had like grown out of punk rock. I was no longer listening to that, and now I was into, by the time 2009 came around, that was probably still like more like metalcore sort of stuff. I was never huge into metalcore, but like some of those bands. And it's just funny because I think had Thrice stayed with that Artist in the Ambulance sound, and say like we're still releasing that sound at that time, I probably been all over the record. But they had
Mhm.
changed, and I wasn't ready for it, man. But I'm ready now. Like I said, like I kind of wrote them off forever, and then I had buddies say, no, you need to listen to this, and I did, and that record probably is right up there for me. Like that's talking about to be nowhere's to be ever, to be everywhere's to be whatever.
To be everywhere is
Yeah,
to be nowhere, I
something,
think.
or it's vice versa, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, like now I can go back and sort of, I think, listen to some of those records and appreciate them more. I'm also older, so like that just changes anyway, right?
How
Like
old are you?
I'm 36. I just
Okay, word. So yeah, when they were putting out the first records, you were a legit teenager.
Yeah, yeah, like because Artist in the Ambulance was what, 2002, two or three. It was
Something
right
like that.
around there, like right as I was finishing high school, or
Yeah.
let's see, what does it say?
I think it's probably
2003.
2003, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think I bought that on the RX Bandits tour. And that was
Yeah.
2003.
And I think I can remember reading, I don't remember what the magazine was, but reading about Thrice. There was an article about Thrice, and I think like it was talking about like this whole like post-hardcore screamo sort of
Mm,
sound that was emerging. And
that was a time. That
yeah,
was
I was
definitely a
still in my
time.
parents' basement though, so that confuses me. But maybe the art maybe the article, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, 2003. Um,
Uh,
Good
I
record.
think I think Beggars is uh it's hard to listen to because you're right. It's such a departure
Hmm.
from like Visu and
Yeah.
Artist and Illusion of Safety. And sure, like with Alchemy Index, they kind of guide you to where they're going.
Yeah.
But um for them to be like peers of my generation,
Yeah.
um I can appreciate and notice that they're also a band just like No Motive that started when they were kids, like
Hmm.
literal kids.
Yeah.
And the band that you grew to love were a bunch of kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so um the band that they are now and the band that put out Beggars, that's them turning into adults, I guess,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's interesting to me too because I remember when VSU came out, people talking about how there was already a change that was sort of happening because they kind of like tapped into some very different that weren't, just that straightforward like post-hardcore sound that they had.
Mhm.
And but when I go back and listen to it now, I'm like, what were we really seeing outside of like one or two little things, right? But I
Yeah.
think it was actually for me, had the Alchemy Index not happened, I may have been more initially open to Beggars
Okay.
then. But like Alchemy Index, like when they started introducing a lot of the electronic elements,
It
that
weirded you out.
I was just like, I'm not, it wasn't doing it for me. And
Yeah.
so, but I had friends who were like swearing by it, right? Like, oh, Alchemy Index is so great. And I mean, again, I think probably because like the electronic elements were like, for me at the time, were more outside of like where I just was, like listening again, like listening to punk and hardcore, post-hardcore sort of stuff. I was like, I'm good without it. It's fine. And then Beggars came out and I was like, but by that point, I think I just sort of lost connection with the band maybe.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so um but
I
no,
would
I was
I
gonna say
would
going back as an adult, listening back to it as an adult, I was technically an adult then, but like listening to it now after all those years, I'm like, yeah, I can appreciate it definitely a lot more. It's one of those ones. It's for me the definition of a grower.
it requires years of maturation.
Yeah, there you go. On
If
my end, not on their end, on my end, years of
on the
maturation. But
listeners end, it just might. But
yeah,
then like and I don't want to speak for other bands, but I've been part of the RX Bandits journey for a long time,
yeah,
and I've watched their fans that were like ska fans that
yeah,
loved the band as a ska band or
yeah,
what they thought was a ska band or whatever. And then there's the fans that they gained way after that when they no longer even had horns in the
yeah,
band.
yeah,
And like same could be said for Thrice. There's fans of theirs that their fandom started at Beggars or
yeah,
their fandom started at Alchemy Index and they know nothing
yeah,
about Identity Crisis,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
But in terms of Beggars, and I've only I think read this. I don't think I've like had conversations with the dudes about this, but like I'm pretty sure some of them lost family members
mm,
in the writing or or
right,
recording of the record.
yeah,
And so I think the mood and the vibe are very much indicative of what
yeah,
they were going through at the time. And so I mean it's a heavy record and it's a moody record and it's obviously not like a post hardcore record that you would
right,
think it to
yeah,
be, I guess.
yeah, yeah,
Um it but yeah, like we're saying, it requires a mature listen.
yeah. I think, and which is, I think, great. It's all like, I enjoy when that happens, when there's a record that whether I gave it a shot when it first came out or just kind of passed on it for whatever reason, to be able to go back to it and go, okay, you know what? I was wrong, or I've been missing out for the past, I guess in that case, 11 years, 12 years, right? Like,
It
um,
challenges you.
yeah. And I mean, I think that's one of the greatest things about music. Like, um, because I'm typically the kind of listener or fan of a band who supports and appreciates bands who evolve, right? Like
Yeah.
who want to progress. Does it necessarily mean I'm going to love the albums that come out? No, not necessarily, but I'm also not typically one of those fans who sits and bickers about, oh, I really wish they just sounded like they did in the old days or what have you, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, so, for a band like that, it's great. And like I said, it took me listening to something years later to be able to kind of fully appreciate,
Sometimes it happens.
yeah,
And it needs to happen
what
that
came
way.
before that. But um, yeah, man, this was a lot of fun.
Hell yeah. I would say to close the book on Beggars, if you
Yeah,
haven't latched on a specific song,
yeah,
to me the best song on that record is In Exile.
okay, yeah.
In Exile is a really great song.
Well, it's going to be my new favorite song, based solely off that. Roger said so it's my new favorite song.
Hey, man. Just give it a shot. Give it
Yeah,
a
man.
shot.
Yeah, man. Hey, thanks for hanging out and doing this.
Absolutely, man.
Even though it was so hard, you said.
Just hard to pick 5,
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
You know, it's been well documented that I love Vagrant, obviously, for
right.
so many freaking reasons.
And I was saying I teed you up by saying a top 10. So, and then we changed it because we realized we're like, well, there's some of these labels because I can't remember if I told you, but like the one rule basically we had was that you could only have one record per band, you know, because like, there are some labels where I'm like, I could probably pick 4 records from a band to take spots on here. So
yeah.
So in doing that, we were like, well, some of these labels, we really loved some of these releases, but to come up with 10 that we're like super into might stretch on some of these labels. And then others, it's like Vagrant, where I'm like, I could probably name 10 like that and be like, yep, we're good to go. Right. But so we decided to narrow. We're like, well, we'll just go with 5. And then as many honorable mentions as we want.
I mean, I basically got my 10 by
I was saying, I let you do it anyway. It's all good, but
I appreciate it. If we were to do a Fat or an Epitaph one, I would have even harder time.
Yeah, man. That's I'm actually working on, at the time of recording this, my Fat list right now. So when I hit
Fat Records,
I was say when I hit stop, I will tell you, just in case this comes out before the Fat Records episode. I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, no, thanks again for getting on here and doing this with
I look at you, I don't see an intelligent, confident man. I see a cocky, scared, shitless kid.